Welcome into the Hoops Fix on Facebook Live. Remember, you drive the conversation here. Send us your comments, your questions in the comments section on Facebook Live, and we will make sure that those comments or questions get on this conversation. I'm Tyler Jacobs. That is Tim Doyle. And today the topic of conversation is going to center around Amar'e Stoudemire, who has decided to retire officially from the NBA, signed a one-day contract with the New York Knicks, so he can officially retire as a New York Knickerbocker. Let's just start real quick with some memories you have of Amar'e as a player, Tim, because he's someone you did get to play against.
Yeah, I played against him a bunch in high school, and you knew at that time that he was on a whole nother level as far as his intimidation and blocking shots and dunking and yelling. And he was a guy who went through a lot in his life. His mom was in and out with bouts with the law, 5 different high schools in 4 years, but has really been able to stay on the straight and narrow. And I think he was on the path to be a Hall of Famer. Facebook people out there, am I crazy? Because go back and look at his numbers. He was averaging over 20 points a game. He had a season with the Suns. He averaged over 26 points a game. Now you say, oh, it's because Nash is dropping dimes and all he's got to do is lay it in or dunk. Okay, when he goes to the Knicks, his first season on the New York Knicks, he averages over 24 points a game. So, yes, he's not a Hall of Famer because of the injuries, obviously the microfracture surgery, but I answered this question before, and I'll throw this back at you, T. Okay. Overrated, underrated, or just rated?
I think he's going to be just rated, just right. I look at him very similarly to a Karl Malone. Now, whereas a Karl Malone didn't deal with the injuries that Amar'e Stoudemire did, had the longevity to play alongside another Hall of Fame type point guard. You mentioned Steve Nash. If Stoudemire had stayed there in Phoenix, or if he had had the help that he needed in New York, I think you're looking at a guy who, for his career, is averaging something closer to 22, 23 points per game. Not quite Karl Malone, maybe, but for 13 seasons, 22 points a game, 10 rebounds. You look at the team success he had in Phoenix, especially even though they never won a title or made it to an NBA Finals. It's a team that would reel off 55, 60 wins just like that. So I think he's rated just right because people will consider the fact that he was probably robbed of some production by those injuries.
Yeah, then as his career went on, check out his numbers. He really understood his role. He shot over 50% down the line at the end of his career. He came off the bench. He wasn't the same athlete that he was in Phoenix. But just go back and think about those Steve Nash Suns teams. Think about how many contracts Steve Nash, he got people paid. Want to go down that list?
Joe
that
Johnson.
list is sick. Shawn Marion.
Sure.
Quentin Richardson.
Boris Diaw went to San Antonio.
Rajah Bell.
I
mean, he had guys, stopper. He just broke guys off. Barbosa got his start there.
Yep.
But Nash was so great at getting everyone else involved, and that was such a unique thing where I think Mike D'Antoni caught lightning in a bottle, because if you look at what Mike D'Antoni has done since he's left Phoenix, Nothing. The Knicks have been a disaster. The Lakers have been a disaster. But I'm sure that people in Houston think, we got Mike D'Antoni. Him, James Harden, that's the mix that we need. Harden is basically Nash 2.0. I mean, what are these people thinking? We all know this is going to be an absolute nightmare down in Houston. But I think D'Antoni caught that lightning in a bottle, and heck, hats off to him. He's gotten a lot of other jobs. He's made a lot of big-time money off of those teams.
We get some comments here that is related to a question that we did want to ask concerning Amar'e Stoudemire, who again today signs a one-day deal, with the New York Knicks to retire as a Knick. But you brought up the start to his career in Phoenix where he was at times unstoppable. Will he be remembered by the majority of fans as a Knick or as a Sun? Even though he's retiring as a Knick, Jay Rush on Facebook Live says he should have retired as a Sun. And Chris Nelson says, why didn't he retire as a Sun? Was nearly an NBA MVP on Phoenix. So given those two comments provided by our Facebook Live viewers, do you think he should be remembered as a Sun or a Knick?
I actually don't even think this is a question. I think that he will always be remembered as a Phoenix Sun.
Okay.
That's how he'll always be remembered. Now, why did he retire as a New York Knick? Because Amar'e Stoudemire has a lot of other things going on in his life. As far as a record label, he's dabbled in some acting. Like, you will hear from him because he will remain a public figure because he wants to remain kind of, with that public image of still having his hands in entertainment. So I think that's why he retired Knick. I think he loved being a Knick.
Okay. Yeah.
You see the pictures of him bathing in the red wine and stuff. That was all because the New York media ate that up. And I think Amar'e understood, how to play with the media a little bit. But when I think of Amar'e Stoudemire as the player, I mean, there's no doubt about it. I always remember him being on the Phoenix Suns. How about you?
I agree. I think that's When I remember players, I want to remember them at their peak. And while he did have a flash in the pan of that peak there in New York before the injuries beset his career, I remember Amar'e dunking on people, turning into a good free throw shooter and a good perimeter shooter with the Phoenix Suns. Avery Fenderson on Facebook Live says, should be remembered with the Suns because he was the man with the Suns.
I think perfect storm there. That's one of those things where he came into the league. He went to the right team.
Mm-hmm.
He was just about 20 years old. He was 19 his senior year of high school. I don't know anybody who does that. But he ended up being on the right team where all he had to do early in his career was basically run the floor, catch the ball, and finish. And then you saw his game evolve. I think if he goes to another team without that point guard, I don't think he's the same player. I think that was the right fit for him, and I think that really let him grow from an offensive standpoint. And then as his career wore on, he became a very good passer. I think he had a very high basketball IQ just from being around Steve Nash. I think Steve kind of demanded that you understand other guys' roles on the floor. So I think when we look back on his career, we'll remember him as a Sun, but I actually think he was disrespected. I don't think when you talk about some of the great players in the game, I think he's always going to be labeled as a system guy, but he clearly showed that one year in the Knicks that he could stand on his own. It was just unfortunate. He was just always injured.
Marv Gotti says he was a better player with the Suns on Facebook Live, so most people agreeing he will be remembered as a Sun, that they liked him or preferred watching him when he was in Phoenix, but he retires as a Knick today. Let's go back to 2002 when he was drafted by the Phoenix Suns, 9th overall. Some notable selections from that draft: Yao Ming going 1 overall, Jay Williams, number 2, Tayshaun Prince, drafted by the same team, the Phoenix Suns, though he was dealt to Detroit and almost immediately in his NBA career won an NBA title. And then Carlos Boozer, a second-round selection of the Cleveland Cavaliers 1 year before they took LeBron James, number 1 overall. Looking back at that draft, and maybe there's a name that we don't have up there, Tim, if you had to redraft the 2002 draft knowing now what you know, 13, 14 years later, would Yao Ming have still been number 1? Would
Yao Ming was dominant.
Oh, he was good.
You know what made Yao Ming awesome is he shot like a 15-footer. I mean, he was like 7'9". He wasn't that tall, but he was like 7'5", 7'6". And he shot like a legit jump shot. It just wasn't a guy who just like dunked and like shot jump hooks. Like he was a well-rounded basketball player, but he was just often injured. You know, unfortunately, when I look back on that draft, I'll just think of guys that we never saw them reach their full potential. You know, Jay Williams was an absolute stud out of Duke. He was another guy from St. Joe's and McCutcheon that I played against many times in high school and in the summer leagues, and he got better like almost overnight there at Duke, and his whole career just started to take off. Now, unfortunately, we all know what happened with the motorcycle accident, but I don't think he reached his full potential. I don't think I don't think Amar'e Stoudemire did. So
I agree.
Boozer did. Boozer's fake hair was the best part of that whole draft.
The Sharpie beard.
What was that?
The story I love about Carlos Boozer is the late, great Prince renting his home in Utah for an evening or a weekend and brought in a construction crew to remodel some rooms and paint it purple. And Boozer gets his house back, and there's a Prince symbol in the pool. Some of the furniture has been changed to purple furniture. Some of the walls have been painted purple. And Carlos Boozer is livid. He calls up Prince's representation, and Prince just says, hey, I'm going to send you a check in the mail, and it's going to be all good. And sure enough, a day or two later, he got a $1 million check in the mail, which covered not only the cost of repairing that, but then left a little meat on the bone for Carlos Boozer to do what he wanted with.
Carlos Boozer got the most out of his ability. But this isn't about Carlos Boozer, but he was like, go back and look at fat Carlos Boozer in college and then go look at chiseled Carlos Boozer in the NBA. He changed his body, and I think he's a punchline to a lot of jokes because of the way he yells and his emphatic ways, can't guard a chair. But as far as his NBA career, he ended up being a pretty good, productive NBA player.
For a second-round player, he made a lot of money. And I, as a LeBron fan, think too bad that the Cavs couldn't have kept him there in Cleveland, and LeBron would have had, because Carlos Boozer at the early part of his career was a 20-10 guy.
Who did he do dirty? Was it the Cleveland or Utah? Didn't he screw somebody really bad?
It was Cleveland that he did dirty. He had a handshake deal with them, but had not signed anything, put pen to paper, and then I guess Utah overwhelmed him with an offer, and since he wasn't officially signed, didn't have pen to paper there, Boozer ended up going to Utah.
That's what Durant could have done. That would have been one of the great douche moves of all time, was you tell the Warriors, I'm coming. Harrison Barnes, gone. Andrew Bogut, gone.
And then
you're like, ha, I gotcha. And then you go back to OKC.
Diminish that team
yes.
that beat you. I see what you're saying.
You could have done that, but it would have been, not cool.
All right, well, this Facebook Live conversation is not supposed to be veering into Carlos Boozer land. Amar'e Stoudemire, who retired today after signing a one-day contract with the New York Knicks, the topic of conversation. Some more comments here on Facebook Live I do want to get to related to what we've discussed already from Christopher Gates. I think Nash made him. We could never get to know him as a Knick player. He stayed hurt, but still, the man. People forget, Chris Nelson says, that he changed the culture of the New York Knicks when he decided to sign there. Carmelo got there. They were able to bring some stars in, but didn't get back to their heyday of the 90s. Max AC wants to know, why doesn't he retire as a Sun? I feel like he changed the culture in NYC, says Max, but sometimes people forget that. Amar'e was shut down from mid-range in 2K7, says Max AC
That's
as well.
pretty funny.
So.
Ken Griffey, I was just looking at his, it's not a bust, but his plaque there going in the Hall of Fame. Do you know what hat he had on in his plaque picture?
Did he have a Mariners hat on? Reds? In a Reds hat?
Now, when I think of Ken Griffey, I will always remember him as a Seattle Mariner. Will you?
Yes. Yeah.
So for him to have the C on his hat, I was like,
that was his hometown team. But it is strange.
That's how,
right?
Yeah, I mean, and Amar'e Stoudemire, I mean, even he knows that. But then again, retiring as a Knick, I mean, who really gives to you-know-what?
Yeah, I agree. Let's go to 2009, 7 years after Amar'e Stoudemire was drafted. And I don't know if you knew this out there, Facebook Live audience, but the Suns nearly had a deal in place to send Amar'e to Golden State for the number 7 pick, which they would have used on Steph Curry. Instead, Golden State stayed put and drafted Steph Curry 7th overall, and we know how that has worked out for the Warriors and Steph Curry. But let's go back in time, and for whatever reason, let's say that Steve Kerr with the Suns at the time is able to get Steph Curry to Phoenix, and Amar'e Stoudemire, instead of playing the second part of his career with the New York Knicks, is playing in Golden State and San Francisco.
Well, obviously, they still had the D'Antoni system there. Even when Alvin Gentry took over, they were still running similar stuff as far as with the pick and rolls and what they did with Steve Nash. I think, obviously, Steph would have been a great fit there. The way it worked out with Steph going to Golden State, I really thought there was a tremendous value with Steph having Mark Jackson as his head coach. And I thought he instilled a lot of confidence, not only in Steph, but Klay Thompson. Mark Jackson came out and said, I have the greatest shooting backcourt in the history of the NBA. Right. And people laughed at him. I don't know if you remember this. People laughed at Mark Jackson when he said that Klay Thompson and Steph Curry is the greatest shooting backcourt in NBA history. But I think that confidence really brought Steph to the next level to give him that freedom to take those wild threes. Maybe they would have tried to corral him a little bit because Steve Nash was a guy who was always 50, 40, 90 and never really took bad shots. I wonder if they would have kind of, chained him up a little bit where he wasn't able to kind of, with that freedom that, Mark just let him go out there and play. And I think Steve's kind of done the same thing. It just, they play a little bit of defense and people like Steve Kerr. But I think that Mark Jackson instilled a lot of confidence in him. I'm not going to say he wouldn't have been a great player. I don't think he's the same player if he doesn't have Mark Jackson as his head coach.
What would you think the legacy is for Steph Curry right now, though, if he's a Phoenix Sun? Is he a two-time NBA MVP? Is he a NBA champion? Is Amar'e Stoudemire, conversely, if Golden State is his home, are the Golden State Warriors an NBA champion with Amar'e Stoudemire?
Great questions. A lot of hypotheticals out there. Ever since Nash has left Phoenix, what have they done?
Not much.
It's been a kind of a disaster. And now if you look at their roster, they have all these guards. And all these guards from Kentucky. I mean, it's one of the strangest teams out there. So a lot of people were not very high on Steph Curry because of the size. And obviously, I think Phoenix is willing to take that chance because they took a chance, with bringing in Nash and paying him a lot of money because and trusting him. So I think they kind of felt comfortable because he was of that same mold. And you see a lot of the passing and the footwork that Curry has is kind of resemblance of Steve Nash, but I think Amar'e Stoudemire, if he would have stayed healthy, I open up the show with this, I think he would have been a Hall of Famer. I really think he would have been a guy who averages 22 points, and you look at his numbers at the end of the day, they would have been off the chart.
Well, there's a question from Max AC that you just answered with that statement there. He says, how do you think he'd be remembered if he stayed healthy? You say, remembered as a Hall of Famer.
I mean, he was averaging like 21, 24, 26, 20, 24. It was pretty consistent. I think that the season in New York, we talked about the winning attitude that he brought there, but that for me was like, this guy can stand alone. Now, if he goes to New York right away, I'm not sure he develops the same way. I thought it was a perfect storm, but when you go to the pros, I'm not sure Julian Edelman's a great wide receiver, but he plays with Tom Brady. Just the right system that fits him. And it was the right system early on for Amar'e to really develop. And then as he expanded his game, I think he showed in New York that he could stand on his own. But he ended up getting paid. Why do you think he wanted to retire a Knick?
I think you made some good points earlier in the conversation that Amar'e has become somewhat of a brand outside of the basketball court, and New York being the largest media market in the country, one of the largest media markets in the world, he's better suited there to fulfill what he wants to do in his post-playing career. Maybe there's some bad blood that lingered from Phoenix that we just don't know about. Who knows? But I think you're closer to the reality as to his motivation. Just because it's New York, it's bigger. He got the big money there, so maybe that's why he wanted to retire one day as a Knick. All right, let's play another hypothetical here. We talked about the 2009 hypothetical between Phoenix and Golden State, the almost deal that was made that would have made Steph Curry a Sun instead of a Warrior, and Amar'e would have been playing for Golden State. A year later, in 2010, the Cavs and Suns reportedly discussed a deal that would have sent Amar'e to the Cavs for Zydrunas Ilgauskas and J.J. Hickson, although no deal was ever really close. It is fun to think, how different would the landscape of the NBA be if Amar'e went to Cleveland? Does LeBron do better in the playoffs? Do they win? Does he stay? Does he never go to Miami? Well, how does this whole butterfly effect happen if Amar'e had been a Cav?
Yeah, I think that would have been a difference maker. I think that at the end of the day would have kept LeBron in Cleveland. Amar'e was a pick and pop guy at that point.
Perfect.
But he could, finish at the rim as well. That was that whole transition, and we've seen it right now in the NBA of that, Zydrunas Ilgauskas was valuable. But now the NBA has gone smaller and more athletic, and they could have put him at the 5 and really spread you out. Maybe Verja at the 5 and Amar'e at the 4. But now you got a very athletic front court there. I think that would have ended up keeping LeBron as long as Amar'e kept his hands to himself.
Yeah.
As long as Delonte West wasn't on the roster. A lot of rumors going around there about West and LeBron's mom. That's just a fact. I mean, that's why I really think LeBron left Cleveland, because of all those things that went on off the court. But if Amar'e was able to go there and they were able to win, because that team was close.
Yeah.
And if you look at the surrounding pieces, Bobby Gibson, not great.
No. Sasha Pavlovich,
not great.
Not gonna
Ricky
cut it.
Davis,
Eric Snow. You do wonder how that might have changed the course of history, not only for the Cavs, but then the Heat, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, all that good stuff. A few more comments we want to share from you, the viewers on Facebook Live, before we get out of here. I think if he was healthy, sky the limit, says Avery.
Yeah.
Ira says his best years in the NBA was when he played with the Phoenix Suns. JB saying, agree with the Stoudemire call. Absolutely think he would have been in the Hall of Fame if healthy for longer. So JB agrees with you. And then JB adds, just now, do you think Stoudemire would have done better in any other era than he did in the 2000s?
I think he would have been great in this era. Phoenix was ahead of its time. I don't know about you. I freaking love those Suns teams. I love
7 seconds or less.
I love those Suns teams, and I love the Sacramento Kings teams. And those teams were ahead of its time as far as how they played. They wanted to spread you out. They wanted to shoot a lot of threes. And that was just not good enough at that era. Obviously, the Kings had the Donaghy and the Lakers series, and the Suns had the series against the Spurs where everyone ran on the floor, or else
Stoudemire got suspended
who
because
knows
Robert Horry hip checks.
I mean, I love the Suns and Kings. It was like my favorite teams growing up because they played such a fun, exciting brand of basketball. And I think the Warriors are a more for those teams. I think that, I think Steph has pulled some stuff from White Chocolate, and Steph's pulled some stuff from Nash. But I think Amar'e almost would have been better in this era. Put him at the 5.
If he had been, instead of a 2002 draft pick, a 2012 draft pick. And he's just entering his prime right now in 2016.
But he played that style. He was able to spread you out. He went to the right team. I think if he ends up going to, like, the Bucks, we don't hear that much about him. He ended up going to the right situation, and Nash was able to get him off the ground. And then as his game expanded, well, then he became one of the best power forwards in the entire NBA.
And he has retired today, signing a one-day contract with the New York Knicks. Amar'e Stoudemire hanging him up after a very good, he thinks, would have been Hall of Fame career had the injuries not sabotaged some of that talent. We appreciate you joining us here on Facebook Live for the Hoops Fix to discuss Amar'e and his career. Don't you forget, we are live on 120 Sports every night at 10 p.m. Eastern. We go 4 straight hours, culminating at 1 a.m. with The Rally, the best and fastest hour in sports. We'll see you tonight on the 120.